Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities to find out what it is that helps them to find their place, find their sense of belonging. And this week, I say it every week, but this week we've got Dr. Ravindra Desai, and he is the Ernest Rutherford Fellow in the Center of Fusion and Space Astrophysics at Warwick University. He's got so many, he's an amazing young man, right? And he's got such a fantastic story. I'm just so glad that he's chosen to share his story with us. And so I'm going to stop the talking and I'm going to ask Ravi the question which I always ask, which is, can you tell me a little bit about what it is that gave you your original sense of identity, sense of belonging as you were growing up?
Yeah, well, I guess first of all, thanks for inviting me on here, Wayne. I'm honored, honored to be here. I guess that's a difficult question. I mean, my first instinctive response to that was, oh, I don't really belong, Wayne, or I haven't belonged, but I think I do. I do have a quite a distinct identity, which maybe feeds into belonging. So maybe that comes from my family and the way I grew up. So I grew up in a mixed household. My father's South African Indian, and my mother's German. And there's a lot of sort of complexity to that. I mean, the whole reason we were in this country, I should say, was because they married across the colour line, and it wasn't possible in South Africa. It was actually illegal to marry across the colour line. So the reason we came to the UK was because of that. But there's a lot of positivity that came out of that, I think. We felt growing up that, our presence was evidence that segregation wasn't the way forward. We need to have a multicultural society, and and therefore we had multiple cultures in our households. We weren't just ethnically mixed. My father was a practicing Hindu. My mother was a practicing Christian. She went to church, so we had that mix as well. And yeah, I guess that feeds a lot into our identity growing up for me and my siblings. Even though we didn't belong to a specific community or that, we had quite a strong conviction in who we were. And the mantra within our house from my dad, and maybe from that generation and the whole civil rights movement, was education, education, education. That if we studied hard, my dad would say education is something that could never be taken away from you. So that was something that was really instilled in us, and I think really gave us our drive to study hard, and it gave us that conviction to overcome any sort of obstacles that we would face, and I guess you do face as a minority in society.
So you got a kind of like an eclectic mix. You had the German mother side, you had the Indian side from your father, but they met in South Africa, which, as you said, it had all of the issues related to apartheid and segregation, but yet they found unity and love, which meant you came across here, which meant they came across here to find a place where they could call their own, as it were. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and how much interaction then did you have with your extended family, or was it kind of like a close nuclear family and those people who you associated with in the local community?
I guess because the reason we came over, we didn't have any extended family in this country. So the extended family were always different. I mean, we always knew who they were. I think in those days, my parents would have long telephone conversations with them, and we knew who everybody was, but we weren't close to them. It wasn't like our cousins were the same as our brothers and sisters, but there was definitely the strong influence from our backgrounds, if that makes sense. We traveled and we visited South Africa and we visited Germany, so we were definitely aware of our cultural background.
Yeah, and it sounds to me as though your parents didn't shy away from telling you about your heritage, etc., and who you were. Yeah. And a pathway through that, as you said, was education. So in terms of schooling, how was your school experience? What was it like being in the classroom? How did other students view you? How did your friends view you? What was it like for you growing up?
Um, so I mean, the school. So I actually, what I didn't mention to you the other day, Wayne, is I actually went to a primary school for 2 years on the other side of Birmingham before we moved to where we grew up.
Right.
And that was interesting. There's probably about, a quarter ethnic minority students. And I remember quite a distinct experience related to race when I was 4 years old, which I was just thinking about this morning. And I remember they used to have story time in the classroom where you'd sit down and you'd have a story. And yeah, as a kid, you absolutely love that. That's the highlight of the day. And then at some point, to try and cater to the ethnic groups, they introduced Asian story time. And then all the Asian kids would have to go out the classroom and sit in the corner of the sports hall and they'd have a different story. And then, right, and then I was lumped in with the Asian kids as well, which was interesting. I guess they see my name, but
Yeah.
I was taken out, and I used to hate it. I used to, not nothing to do with the story, but I used to be like, I want to sit in the classroom with all the other kids. And I remember trying to stay in there at one point. I sneaked in, sat at the back, and then halfway through the story, they pointed to me and said, "I'm sorry, you have to go out now." And so yeah, I remember quite a distinct experience of race back from when I was 4. But after that, we moved, and then to a different school. And at that point, I think I was the only boy of color. There was another girl in our class growing up, and within our school, we had primary and secondary school on the same site. So people came, people went, but it was the same. I went to the same place. And there were odd instances where people would mention race, but I think up to about 13 or 14, I would say it was overall there wasn't too much friction or.
So growing up, I know that I'm going to touch on this very quickly, and we'll come back to it. And I know that you went on to you're doing astrophysics. Where did you get that passion for astrophysics from? Can you remember your earliest experience of physics or math? What was it that excited you about like the stars, space, etc.? Was it an early experience for you, or what was it?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely something that came from when I was quite young. I remember a book from when I was maybe 4 or 5 that was about space, and I loved it. And my parents, my dad had a scientific background, so he always encouraged that kind of interest, and that came out of it. But I mean, I should say my undergraduate degree was actually in aerospace engineering.
Right.
And that's because I chose that because I thought, it's more practical. It will lead to a job and better career prospects. And after that, I went and pursued a PhD in physics. And I think that kind of view is something that's maybe quite common among minority ethnic communities. You have very low BAME people within physics and those because they're not seen as really practical subjects when actually, you study physics,
You can
it's a
do
numerate subject. Yeah, you can do anything really. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So what was it that you said that you went on? There was a couple of things which you said. One was about, it wasn't until you were about 13 or 14 where race kind of came into the picture. In what way was that? And how did it affect you in any way? How did it change your perception as you were growing up?
It's a difficult question. I mean, I remember when I was about 14, 15, that's the age when you start going out and about. The area we grew up with, I come from a reasonably well-off background, but the area wasn't a great area. So a lot of my friends didn't come from great backgrounds. We were out in this, the streets along the 50, from 15 onwards, doing what kids do. And at that age, I remember there'd be instances and people would pick fights and you'd be called names in the street and things like that. And that's when I realized, but that never really, even though I realized at that point, you know, race was a thing, if that makes sense. Even though I'd kind of always grown up knowing about you know, racism and that, I realized it was a thing that affected me. It didn't really bother me. I always had my family. You know, we were a strong core. There's four of us children. I had my friends around me. You know, the majority of them were white at that point, and you know, they all had my back. It didn't really get to me. It was more later, you know, when you're in an academic environment, when you're working, and that's when you're interacting with people. That's when I think, you know, that's when racism, I realized, is can be quite a serious thing.
Okay, okay, so okay, that kind of makes sense. That it wasn't a main focus for you, if and you didn't allow it to pull to stop you from trying to achieve what you wanted to achieve. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I think so. It was always external, if that makes sense. The people who were racist to me were never, you know, I mean, I was at school and then I went to A levels, and there was never any racism that impacted my career
Yeah,
progression at that, if that makes sense. So there was never anything that held me back at that point in life. I think, yeah.
yeah. So you also mentioned just briefly about the fact that you did an aerospace
Yeah,
uh, degree because of the practical nature, or what you felt you'll be able to get a job in the aerospace industry, if anything. So what was it that, where did the not the switch, but what was it that then made you think, oh, let me go and do a physics degree? And can you explain some of kind of like what it is that you do? I'm
yeah.
fascinated about what it is that you do.
So yeah, I guess when I was coming to the end of my engineering degree, I like the research projects within my degree. I found them really interesting, sort of just, you know, researching, finding out new things. And so I thought, you know what, I want to continue learning. I want to learn more. And, you know, my aerospace did involve a bit of space. There's kind of a crossover with astrophysics. And at the moment, I study space weather. So that means I look at how things on the sun, you know, solar flares, how they impact our satellites and our, you know, communications, and maybe even our power grids. They can knock out power grids. So I look at trying building models to predict that,
Mhm.
um, those those effects.
I'm going, you know, I'm going to have to ask you to just break it down a little bit more in terms of, um, you say that you look at models, you model the activity on the surface of the sun. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So you model the activities on the surface of the sun, and is it basically make a prediction of how that may impact on satellites in our kind of like physical space around the Earth? Am I right in saying that?
yeah, exactly. There's lots of different timescales at which this can occur. Some things, you know, light takes 9 minutes to travel from the sun to the earth. So um, some energetic particles which travel from the sun to the earth travel very close to the speeds of light. So in some situations, you have very little warning. So at that point, you need to develop physical models that can predict the risk to satellite and the risk to astronauts as well. Um,
I think you're downplaying what you do, man, because really, I think it sounds like the stuff which you do is quite vital in terms of satellite communications and all of those kinds of things. Because without your predictions, um, we something potentially could go offline in seconds. Am I right in that?
kind of, yeah. We're researching new techniques that we want to share with like the UK Met Office and places like this who do the predictions. Um,
So I'm going to ask a question. In terms of your how many other people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds kind of like are in the space which you're existing in terms of
yeah, no, it's a good question. There aren't many, Wayne. So I've recently got a faculty position at Warwick, and at the faculty level, there's only one other um, minority ethnic person in my field, and he's at a similar level to me. Um, I don't know anyone more senior in the UK who's from a BAME background. So yeah, there's just pretty much us. And yeah, it's yeah, it's interesting. And I mean that feeds a lot into what I do. I mean, in addition to research, I do a bit of EDI work, and I always every summer, for instance, I supervise Nuffield Foundation students, and these are students that A-level students, and the requirements to get these placements mean that you can't have a parent who's had a higher education degree or a degree level education, and you can't earn more than a certain amount of money, and it really cuts across all demographics, I think, and it's such a fantastic scheme. And every summer, we take people in, and it's for me, like, that kind of thing is really the saving grace of academia. The fact that even though I don't necessarily identify with a lot of people in the field sort of on a personal level, I mean, I hope that doesn't come across wrong, they're all great people. It's small enough that you're in charge of your own research, that you can make a difference. You can take on the students that you want to choose. You can do things the way you want to do them. So hopefully in a few years, Wayne, I can tell you that the situation's a bit different.
No, I know, because I know you were at Imperial, and I know that you did do a lot of work with the research. And I remember we had a number of meetings with people about accessing university, getting students into university, and the importance of people who look like us being in those spaces to, one, get the exposure, but also contribute the ideas for future generations, or for this generation, as it were. How did you? What was it that motivated you to actually enter that space, that kind of like EDI space? Was there anything that kind of like, was it, you could have just said, I've made it, other people can make it. What was it that made you think, actually, no, I want to make a difference here?
I think the first time I thought about getting involved with it was during my PhD. I think an email came around that said we need a student representative on Athena Swan committee for promoting women in sciences. And at that point I looked at it and I was like, you know what, I really want to do this. I hadn't even thought about it constructively before that, like I want to do something. I just thought, you know what, like, if you've got these feelings inside you and you feel like you're being treated in a certain way, I feel like it's something that's actually quite therapeutic in a lot of ways to do this. And it helped me a lot. And actually, you know what, to tie it back to your first question, I think it actually helped me with sort of a sense of belonging in what I do in the academic space, because I've got something else that I'm passionate about in addition to the research, and something else that I feel that contributes to positivity, but also feeds back, and it makes, it feeds back on positivity to myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like making a way for yourself, which will help others. Well, making a way for others, which actually helps you to make a way for yourself, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering. I just kind of like jumping around a little bit here, but one of the things which kind of like just occurred to me was, because of your parents' experience of kind of like the inequality in South Africa and them coming over here, do you think that kind of fed into your kind of like desire to see justice, or to see more equality within the space which you've chosen to occupy? It's just something that kind of like came into my head as you were saying it.
Definitely, like, definitely, without a doubt. Like, if my dad was still around, I'd say you should invite him on here, because, like you said before, my parents didn't shy away from telling us about what life was like for my dad in South Africa, and there's stories upon stories. He could tell a story, and just some of the memories that I have of that are just not necessarily like stories of bad things happen, but like the positive memories just feed into your sense of identity. And I remember, for instance, that when Barack Obama got elected in 2008, I was watching with him, and then he was he was remembering when he was watching it. I don't know if you watched it, Way. He was watching when he was talking about and remembering in like 91 when Mandela got freed from prison and got arrested, and then he was watching the TV and his tears were just streaming down his face, and I was there and I was just like caught up in the emotion and I was crying. I was just like, I was a teenager, so I was like, wow, this is crazy. But you know what I mean? That really like it's a fantastic memory with him. So yeah, that um that drive to to overcome those sorts of obstacles definitely ingrained in us. And not just me, like with my family, my brother's actually a human rights barrister in the city as well. So he actually does a lot of work on actions against the police for wrongful police killings and things like this. And
Right.
if you see something on the news, he's probably representing things. But yeah.
Wow. So within the family, that early experience, that experience which your mum and dad had in terms of love across racial lines, as it were, and the fact that they said they were going to stand up against it, that has kind of like been very prominent within your upbringing. And so wherever you see those barriers, wherever you see those things which aren't equal, aren't right, you feel that you need to stand up against them. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, like I talked about my dad's experience in South Africa, but you know, compared to that, my experience hasn't been anything compared to that sense. But you know, we've had so much opportunities. You know, as is maybe typical, your parents coming over from different countries, they want to give you the opportunities they never had. So,
Yeah.
in some senses, I don't want to. You know, I want to be careful about putting the onus on minorities to change things, but I do feel like there's a sense of responsibility. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's right, if you know what I mean, to do these things. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm going to just switch it slightly because I heard a lot from your dad's perspective. But what about from your mother's side in terms of being a white woman marrying into an Asian family? What was her perception? How was she described? What she went through as well?
Um, I mean, when you know, when she talks back to the time when they were, you know, when they were first dating, getting together, her eyes light up. It's like it was exciting. You know what I mean? They were taking on the world, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
that was her experience. Her family always welcomed us. There was never any
Mhm.
like, you know, even back 1970s or whatever when they got together, there was never any like, oh, you know, they wouldn't. He was accepted with open arms. You know, my mother grew up in Berlin as well, which you know, quite close to the Berlin Wall. So there's interesting stuff happening there as well. But
Yeah.
she necessarily didn't have things weren't rich for them as well. So in some sense, I don't know. I don't know. Oh, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, Wayne. But just to move back to your question. So I think when we come to this country, you didn't always fit it as mixed as a mixed background. When we
Mm.
went to the temple, it wasn't. It was clear that we weren't always accepted in the Hindu
Mm.
community because I'm a mixed background. We don't speak Gujarati. That's my
Mm.
father's tongue, and so yeah, it was you're in the middle, but it was it was a positive upbringing, I think.
No, no, that's wonderful. That's one. There's positivity from everything. That's what I'm hearing from you. It's kind of like, um, actually, things happen, but it's how you deal with those things which happen. Yeah. Do you take them as something which is to pull you down, or do you take them to help to bolster you and lift you up? And based on what you've said, your parents always, from my understanding, they always told you, you know, there is a silver lining at this experience. There's something we can learn from this. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, quotes from my dad are popping into my head. I can't share them all with you. But one of the things he used to say that, and I'm not sure I agree with this, but he always used to say, you know, if someone's racist to you, it's your job to change his mind. And I think that's a big thing to say. But you can see there's a
Yeah.
level of positivity there, or you know, this
Yeah.
can-do attitude. Yeah.
It depends on how you go about changing their mind, because sometimes, like from probably growing up as he did in South Africa and seeing that level of racism against him, which he would have had to have endured, um, um, actually by doing things which would make people see you in a better light and see your community in a better light. You can almost say that that was a way in which they could change people's minds in a non-aggressive way, but it's a way of changing people's minds, seeing that we can achieve, we can do these things together, you know? So I think, I suppose it's how we look at that kind of situation. Yeah. So I've already kind of like asked the question about the numbers in the physics and astrophysics community. What can we do? What do you think we can do to help to promote more Black and Asian children going into kind of like these type of academic fields? What could we do? I know it's a big question I've just thrown.
I think mentoring can be a big help. You know, when you're making decisions as to progress to the next step, you know, whether you're doing PhD or postdoc or, you know, fellowship and lecturer, a big thing that's kind of come back to me is the kind of the relationships I've had with people senior to me. And I think even just the 1 or 2 positive relationships that can make such a difference. That's what I've personally found. So when there's new people coming through, you know, if there's it's a bit of a catch-22 because if there aren't minority ethnic people there to mentor them, how do you get the process started? But I think mentoring can be a big thing. Like I said, I'm quite passionate about the Nuffield Foundation scheme. So even just getting people into universities, people from lower income backgrounds, disadvantaged backgrounds, into university is the first step. Getting them into the academic space is difficult. We have to make it a safe space. It's not always a safe space for everyone. In my research group, I will say something if there's something which I don't think is quite right. I'll say it quite publicly, and that's something that I really try and do to make sure that, you know, when the new PhD students are coming through and they see the environment, they feel welcome. It's not just a hostile place. So I think that can make a big help.
Following on from what you've just said, because I think what you've said is absolutely spot on, that idea of having mentors and sponsors. Have you had any experience of people who have helped mentor you to get to where you are now? And in what ways have they helped you?
I haven't had a specific person who's mentored me. There isn't a specific person. So in some sense, I would say I haven't, and I would say that's actually been quite difficult. I would say the way that I've managed to get to where I am, and, you know, or get to a permanent position, which is just by being incredibly proactive. You just have to knock on so many doors. You have to email so many people. You can't let anybody else. Nobody's going to open that door for you. Nobody's going to, you know, sometimes you'll be lucky, but you can't rely on that. So you have to create your own opportunities for you. So to be honest, Wayne, I'd like to say I had been mentored, but I don't think I have, to be honest.
It's interesting because I'm going to link you back to what you said a little bit earlier, where you said your dad said to you, you have to make people change their minds. Someone's racist to you, you have to make them change their minds. And what you've just said to me is almost a fulfillment of that, in that although you haven't had those opportunities where other people have had mentors to say, okay, we see the potential, we see the talent in that individual and help to propel them to the next level, you've actually been very proactive for people then to recognize, actually, we need to get this guy to the next level and give him the opportunity. Does that make sense?
I think so. I've never thought about it like that, but yeah, I guess that makes sense.
It's the way, just because of what you said in terms of how many physicists are there out there who could have potentially given you an opportunity, but haven't necessarily spent the time to give you that opportunity, even though you're giving up, trying to give opportunities to other people? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of being proactive. That it would be good. It would be easier for all of us if we were able to find those mentors who can help to provide us with guidance. But I think your father was a very good mentor to not just your father.
Yeah,
I think
maybe.
it's an exceptional mentor based on what you've said about him and the passion that he's given you. If I'm honest.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So what I would, one of the other things that I would just, you mentioned about mentorship and sponsorship, and it sounds as though that's what you would like to do now that you're in the position to help others. Yeah, you want to give back to so that other students who are coming through would also be able to come into the field and enjoy the field in the same way that you do. You know. I'm going to ask a kind of, other than what kind of barriers would you say young people might face when thinking about going into something like astrophysics or physics, etc.? Especially students from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds. What potential barriers do you think they might face?
I think the financial barriers, one of the main things, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think I remember the first time I talked to you was when they introduced postgraduate tuition fees for
Yeah,
this.
that's right.
And the thing is, I know, like I said to you before, a lot of the people I went to school with didn't go to university and didn't
Yeah,
take that path. And I actually know people who were kind of put off university when the fees went up from 3,000 to 9,000.
yeah.
I can just see there's a barrier, and people say, oh, it's a loan, you don't have to pay it back, it shouldn't be a barrier. But these things are barriers. And then as a PhD student, like with the cost of living crisis, it's you have to sacrifice for like 3.5 years. Most people don't finish in 3.5 years, Wayne, and this is one of the biggest barriers I see. In my when I where I did my PhD, they actually reduced the funding. People weren't finishing on time, so they reduced the funding from 3.5 to 3 years because they thought that would make people finish faster. And I remember someone from my group who was from a low income background who reached 3 years and they just disappeared. They didn't even say goodbye to anyone. I think they were embarrassed. And then in that same year, I saw someone from a well-off background finish their PhD. They ran over. Then they spent a year in the research group working. I think there's a bit of money for them, but a lot of it was kind of free. They could support themselves, and then they managed to get a postdoc and they managed to get to the next level. So I think there's a massive
Yeah,
financial
yeah,
difficult to do a PhD if you're a low income background, and why would you? It's
yeah.
yeah. And I mean, don't get me wrong. PhDs are absolutely fantastic. There's so many opportunities within my PhD. I've had the opportunity. I traveled to America multiple times. So many opportunities. But yeah, I think that's one of the main barriers I see, that there's just not enough
There's not enough
structural support.
there's not enough funding opportunities for those who would like to pursue PhDs. Yeah, and I think it's really what you just said about. I know you haven't mentioned where you did your PhD, probably, right, but that's fine. But to cut the money and say you need, that's like I can't even say it's a carrot and a stick. It's just not right, right?
Yeah,
You know. Um, so financial barriers. So there's a couple of things which we've kind of like discussed about mentorships. We've talked about the financial barriers. Um, would you also say the opportunity, knowing that the opportunities are there? Would you say that that's another potential barrier?
potentially. I mean, when I said, yeah, okay, so just to clarify, when I said there's myself and one other in my field, that's kind of within space physics. if you consider astrophysics, that's maybe a bigger field, and whole of physics, I'm sure there's more minority ethnic people who should be mentioned, if that makes sense. I don't know. Like I mentioned earlier, that I went to engineering before physics, so there's not many people from minority ethnic backgrounds starting physics in the first place, starting engineering. So yeah, maybe more awareness of the career path would definitely help.
So, all right. I'm going to kind of, I'm not sure if there's if anyone wants to ask a question, but I'm going to ask kind of like a couple more. One of the questions that I was going to ask you was just in relation to, do you, in the career which you've chosen, do you have that sense of belonging, that I belong here, right? Or are you, do you have that sense of I belong here? And what is it that gives you that, either gives you or doesn't give you that sense of belonging?
I do feel like I belong. I feel like I've managed to create an identity. People know that I supervise a lot of students. Earlier, like undergraduate students, earlier this year, I won an award from the Royal Astronomical Society, and that like cited that in the last few years as a postdoc, I think in 4 years I supervised over 30 undergraduate students on their research projects.
Wow.
And several of them went to papers. You know, I'm saying that because you ask. I'm not just trying to big myself up, but people can see, you know, I've created a bit of an identity in terms of that's what I do, and do you know what I mean? People can see that, and I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing, and now that I've got a permanent position, it's a platform, you know, and I don't have to think about what am I going to publish this year, next year. I can think about what am I going to do in 10 years time, 20 years time. And this is the point where you can really execute your vision. So I feel very fortunate. I feel very blessed to be where I am today, and I do feel like, yeah, I belong, and I can achieve now that I'm here. Yeah,
I love that. I love that answer. I really do, because it's the selfless giving which you did, which has helped to get, and it's something which you had said earlier on as well, because you had said it was when you started to actually get involved with the Nuffield Trust, that's when you kind of like felt as though you belonged, because you were giving back. It wasn't just about taking and what I can get from it. It's actually what you're giving back to others, which has helped you gain that sense of belonging. Have I assessed that right?
yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to talk myself up too much in this way, but
you don't have to. You've already got the award, which tells us that's what you do. So it's all good.
Yeah.
You know, it's really good. So I'm going to ask final question then. Final question for this one. It's kind of like a two-parter. The first question would be, what advice, or the first part of the question would be, what advice would you have given to your younger self as to how they would navigate, what they could do, etc.? And the second part would be, what would you say is your wow factor? When you look to where you are now, right? What would you say, wow, I didn't think I would get that, or I didn't think we could do that? You can answer either one or both, whichever.
But I mean, to the first one, I would say, don't be scared to push. I think when you keep pushing, when you keep doing it, you sometimes upset people. But for me, I'm fortunate that when I've pushed, I've managed to get through, and so my pushing has been vindicated, if that makes sense. You know, my attitude to just try and keep going. So I'd say, just don't worry about it. Just keep going. In terms of my wow factor, I don't know, Wayne. I can't answer that, I'm afraid.
That's all good. That's all good. Ravi, it's been brilliant having you as our guest on Belonging today. It really has been a riveting conversation. I've learned so much about astrophysics. I've learned about the impact of of how our own personal perceptions, our own personal ideas, etc., help us and can help others to progress. If we have a positive attitude, and you are a very, to me, from what I've seen, you're a very positive young man, right? And that positivity is what's helping you. You don't look at the glass as being half empty; it's half full, and you can make it fully full. That's how I see what you're doing. You're a trailblazer in your field, yeah. And I want to see you succeed. Yeah, we all want to see you succeed. I know you've got a young family, and it can be hard at times. But if you ever need anyone to have a conversation with, then we are here for you. I didn't mention this at the start, but Ravi was on our team at Imperial as one for until he moved up to Warwick, and yes, he came and he spoke about. He was so incensed about the financial burden that the college was putting on, and we spoke about it at length, and we made a difference. We made a change. So keep doing what you're doing. Keep searching for those things which you're passionate about, and keep. I like your phrase. Don't be scared to push, because when you push, you can make change. So continue to make change in the area which you're doing. All right. It's really been brilliant.
Thank you very much for your words, Wayne. Very, very kind.
All right. I'm going to just let people know what we're going to be doing next week, who we're going to have next week. So next week we're going to have next week. I'm not sure if that's the right screen. Can you see Anna Chan?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, next week we're going to have Anna Chan, who is the founder and director of the Asian Leadership Collective, and the solutions engineer as well. So she's going to be our guest next week, and she's going to give us some insight into this Asian Leadership Collective, which she has founded. I want to just say, if you haven't seen any of the other interviews, then please go to our YouTube channel at tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, where you can hear this and many other interviews which we've done with individuals from the Black and Asian community. Okay, we had the 100th guest, so you can also see that story. But as I always say, it's these many faces, these many people who share their stories that help us to get a better understanding of what it is to belong from so many different perspectives. And I just want to say, continue to share your stories. I'll still be listening. We'll all be listening, because they're valuable stories. So until next week, have a pleasant weekend and have a pleasant week. And we will see you again next week. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Ravi.